October 6, 1973. Over 1,200 Syrian tanks thundered towards Israel's thin northern defences. Waiting for them, just 177 Israeli tanks. Outnumbered 7-1, the defenders utilised innovative technology that gave them the upper hand in one of the most legendary stands in modern warfare. This is the story of the Valley of Tears, and how the right tech in the hands of desperate soldiers made the impossible possible. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Across Israel, life slowed to a reverent halt, but it wasn't about to stay that way. On the Golan Heights, a strategic overlooking northern Israel, that silence was about to be shattered. At 2 p.m, a coordinated Syrian and Egyptian attack achieved almost total strategic surprise. Then, the Syrian army unleashed a terrifying wave of steel. Across the entire Golan front, a force of up to 1,400 tanks, a mix of Soviet-made T-55s and modern T-62s, surged forward under a massive artillery barrage. The T-62 was particularly feared, armed with the U-5TS Molot 115mm smoothbore gun, the first of its kind, capable of firing high-velocity armour-piercing rounds that could rip through most tanks of the era. Their objective was simple: break the Israeli lines and pour down from the Golan. A huge part of this attack, involving hundreds of tanks from the Syrian 7th Infantry Division, was aimed squarely at a wide, shallow basin, perfect terrain for a massed tank assault. Facing this armoured tide was Israel's 7th Armoured Brigade, mustering only about 170 tanks. The soldiers were caught largely off guard. Many had been fasting for the holiday. While there had been some last-minute warnings, intelligence had failed to predict the sheer scale and timing of the attack. As the first Syrian shells exploded, the Israeli defenders scrambled to their positions, watching a nightmare of enemy tanks appear on the horizon. The valley before them was about to earn its tragic name, the Valley of Tears. As if the odds weren't bad enough, the Syrian force rolled in with the deadliest Soviet gear of the era: tanks, missiles, and defences designed to crush any counterattack. Against firepower like this, the question wasn't how the Israelis would win, but if they could survive at all. Syrian infantry carried the Saga anti-tank missile, a wire-guided weapon that could be fired by a single soldier to knock out a tank from over a kilometre away. For the dug-in Israeli tanks, these missile teams were a lethal menace, and looming over all of it was a dense umbrella of Soviet-made surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. This system was specifically designed to neutralise Israel's traditional ace in the hole, its powerful air force. In the opening days of the war, Israeli jets trying to provide air support were hammered by these missile batteries, suffering heavy losses. Air support was heavily constrained, leaving the tankers on the ground feeling terrifyingly alone. Overwhelming numbers, modern tanks, anti-tank missiles, and virtual control of the skies. The Syrian plan looked foolproof. So how do you stop a steel tsunami without more tanks or control of the skies? The answer lay in aging British Centurions, reborn as Shoat tanks, upgraded just enough to turn a hopeless defence into a fleeting chance for survival. What the Centurion lacked in youth, it made up for with some brilliant Israeli upgrades. 3 key advantages, 2 hardware, 1 human, would ultimately turn the tide. First, the gun. The Israelis had replaced the Centurion's original cannon with the British Royal Ordnance L7, a 105mm rifled gun famous for its incredible accuracy. When combined with superior fire control and a well-trained crew, the L7 could hit targets with lethal precision at ranges where the Syrians struggled. It gave them the ability to land the first punch. The second, and maybe the most critical advantage, was optics. The daytime optics in the Israeli Shot tanks were vastly superior to those in the Soviet-built T-55s and T-62s. Israeli gunners could simply see farther and more clearly. Their rangefinders were more accurate, allowing for faster targeting solutions. An Israeli commander could often spot, target, and fire before the Syrian crew even knew they were in danger. In a tank duel, the first accurate shot is almost always the last. The third advantage wasn't a piece of tech, but training and communication. Israeli tanks had excellent radio systems, allowing commanders to talk to each other constantly, creating unparalleled situational awareness. A leader like Lieutenant Colonel Avigdor Kahalani of the 77th Battalion could coordinate his handful of tanks on the fly, shifting them to plug gaps, focusing fire on key threats, and orchestrating maneuvers that were impossible for the rigid, top-down Syrian command structure. For 4 brutal days, these advantages were put to the ultimate test. The Syrians attacked in relentless waves, but the Israelis refused to break. Using the terrain to their advantage, the Israeli crews settled into hull-down positions, hiding their tanks' vulnerable bodies behind ridges and exposing only their tough turrets. From there, they began a deadly harvest. Their superior optics and gunnery allowed them to engage Syrian tanks at ranges of 2,000 meters or more, distances where the Syrian guns were far less effective. One by one, Syrian tanks were knocked out by the unerringly accurate 105mm guns. The Syrian commanders, struggling to coordinate, kept feeding their tanks into the kill zone, baffled by the volume of fire coming from what they must have thought was a much larger force. At night, the fight became a chaotic, close-range brawl, as effective night vision technology was limited on both sides. On the third day, the Syrians mounted their largest assault yet. It was here that Avigdor Kahalani, his battalion worn down to just a handful of tanks, performed an act that became legend. Seeing his men falter from exhaustion, he charged his own tank forward to the crest of a ridge, facing the Syrian advance nearly alone. Inspired by his courage, the remaining tanks rallied to his position. Accounts from the battle describe a desperate, point-blank firefight where tanks engaged at incredibly close ranges. Kahalani and the few tanks beside him fought with ferocious intensity, destroying dozens of Syrian tanks in the final, decisive clash. By the 4th day, the Syrian attack was spent. Faced with catastrophic losses and a complete breakdown of command, their forces finally wavered and then retreated. The few remaining Israeli tanks of the 7th Brigade, many running on their last shells and fumes, had held the line. The ingenuity shown in the Valley of Tears is an incredible testament to how technology and tactics can shape history. When the smoke cleared, the Valley of Tears was a graveyard of Syrian armour. An estimated 260 Syrian tanks and hundreds of other vehicles were left destroyed or abandoned in that sector. The Israeli 7th Brigade, though badly battered, had achieved one of the most improbable defensive victories in history. The battle became a defining moment of the Yom Kippur War, halting the Syrian offensive in the northern Golan and buying precious time for Israel's reserves to mobilize. The outcome wasn't a miracle. It was a victory forged by the critical interplay between soldiers and their machines. The courage of men like Avigdor Kahalani was undeniable, but their bravery was amplified by their tools. Superior optics, a more accurate gun, and the ability to communicate and adapt gave them the edge they needed to defy the odds. The Battle of the Valley of Tears stands as a stark lesson. In war, it's not always the size of the force that matters, but the technology inside it and the skill of the hands that wield it. If you find these deep dives into military strategy and the tech that drives it fascinating, make sure to subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss our next exploration of history's most pivotal battles.